I'll let you see my book, my shirt. So the shirt is in rough shape and I'm going to probably get rid of it today, but I wanted to wear it to show my great love of pop culture references, my age, and to show that I'm psychic because I bought the shirt several years ago before the franchise was rebooted. So my topic today is what you can learn from best-selling books, even if you hate them. So I think that a lot of times I'll see writers groups and they'll be like, oh, I hate this book and I hate this book, and you know, it's what's wrong with the publishing industry is that books like this get, you know, promoted and sell. And I think a lot of times authors are missing out on valuable information that they can learn from these books. Now, to be clear, you don't have to like these books. I'm not saying that you have to like whatever popular massive seller. That when I said authors say they hate these books, I know you had a few books come to your mind. A few came to my mind. I'm not saying to like them, but I think that they are valuable information that we can learn from, whether it's craft, whether it's marketing, whatever. For the sake of at least the first half of the video or the first 2/3, let's assume these are books that are selling, legitimately selling, and that people genuinely like, not people who are hate reading them, or I can later on talk a little bit about people who are kind of cheating the system. So let's talk about books that maybe when you're in school, all of your friends are swooning about how they just love this book, and you're like, oh, they have such terrible taste. Okay, I'm with you. Okay, I'm not saying you have to like those books. I'm also not trying to say that everyone should be happily and smiley and only talk about the best things. Reviews are incredibly important. I would never say that you can't review a book negatively. Negative reviews are incredibly important. If I see a book that has no negative reviews whatsoever, I actually get a little suspicious. Negative reviews help to guide the right readers to your book and the wrong readers away. So this is really helpful. If I read a review that says, even a positive review that says you laughed, you cried, I sobbed for days, I'm not going to read it because I'm not that reader. Now, on the other hand, I see a negative review that says, oh, no one was acting serious in this book, all they're doing is cracking jokes. I might go, that might be a book for me. So negative reviews are incredibly important. So I am by no means saying you have to like every book or that you should never talk about books you don't like. I do think if you want to be a professional author who has a very vocal kind of career, you might want to be careful about that. That might be a topic for a different video because, you know, first of all, you don't want to offend your readers. If your readers love this book and it's not for you, you don't necessarily want to offend them. But that's a different topic. And by no means am I saying that I never am critical. If you wander around my channel, you'll see that I watch and recap and talk a lot of trash about a lot of reality shows. But I'm not on a reality show. I don't work in the reality show industry. I am a viewer, and viewers should give feedback. So I kind of want to ease into the topic by saying all that. So first of all, when you are looking at bestseller books, and this could mean, that is a very vague term. So this could be USA Today or New York Times bestseller. This can be Amazon bestseller. This can be anyone who you think is selling more books than you think they deserve. Okay, so first question to ask yourself is, are you the reader that's meant to read this? If this is a book that's really designed for a teenage girl and you're a man in your 50s, that might be the simple answer as to why it doesn't relate to you. Is this in a genre you don't read? So I am a genre fiction reader. I love the expectations. I want you to hold on to those rules. If I want a romance, you guys better be together at the end, okay? I don't like really sad books. Depression, anger, scary, horror, anything that is too strong in that kind of emotion, it sticks to me like tar. So if a book makes me sad, I'll sob for days. And I won't be over, I can't get over it. Something graphically horrible happens, I'll think of it to this day. I can think of a book I read about serial killers in my early 20s, and I think of it, you know, once a month. I was a much tougher person back then, but now I'm like, I'm not that. So that's the first thing to say. Is this, are you the reader meant for this? If you think all sci-fi is terrible and adults playing make-believe, well then why are you surprised you don't like a sci-fi book? Okay, so let's just get that out of the way. Maybe you're not their reader. You just need to be comfortable. Just say, I'm not the reader for that. That's all you need to say. No one's going to bug you. But as an author, what's interesting to me is if it is in your genre, that's when we can dig in and learn some really valuable stuff. Stuff that can help you be more commercial, if that is your goal. If that's not your goal, then more power to you. Just know that's not your goal and don't expect, manage your expectations with that. So a lot of times what happens is we can start to, as writers, start to forget why people read books. And you could say things like, oh, well, they have too many dialogue tags. They're saying she said too often. Oh, this would have, they don't have a really strong turning point or pinch point for the transition from act 1 to 2. And we can get in so close to the nitty gritty of books that we can start to forget that readers aren't reading for those things. Those things are meant to make a better book, but they don't define necessarily what is good, the only parts that are good. And that's a dangerous place to be as a writer because we can miss it in our own work. So we can start to say, well, I have this great transition from act 1 to 2, and I hit every point on the hero's journey and everything in Save the Cat. And we can forget about the fact that there's this underlying thing. And I think it's a real benefit for keeping an open eye, and this is where you can really dig into. So I'm going to give 2 examples. These are not books. I'll explain more. I've not read 50 Shades of Grey. I knew I wasn't the reader for that book. So I just never got into it. By the time I had kind of heard about it, people were already kind of actively trashing it. So it kind of made me like, okay, I get it, was sort of my attitude about it. But what I hear people say, and I've seen it a lot, is people say, I can't believe 50 Shades of Grey was such a big success. They got everything wrong about the BDSM, sorry, I apologize if that's wrong, community. I know all about the community, therefore my book will be even more popular. And I'm not saying that their book's not going to be popular or that they're wrong, but if you listen really carefully, what you heard was the assumption that the only thing that made that popular was the BDSM, and that accuracy is the only thing that matters, and therefore since your story would be more accurate, you would automatically be more successful. And I think it's a dangerous correlation. So if we kind of dig into that, we could say, but is that why the book was popular? Was it, well, was it? I haven't read it, so I can't say. But it would be worth it if that is the genre you're planning to write, to kind of read why people liked it. Was the idea that the main character was an outsider and it was an introduction to a scene in a world they don't know about? Okay, well, that is something that you can concretely use to inform your book, okay? The majority of people who are reading are not aware of that scene, and so I need to find a way to bring them in XYZ. I don't know if that's the case, but it is something to consider. So that is one way to kind of tear apart a book and see, well, why is it? And I know plenty of people who are writers who love the book. Like I said, I haven't read it, so I don't have an opinion either way, but I also know I'm not the audience for that book. And so you want to be careful about making assumptions about why a book is popular and say, well, it was just popular because it had BDSM, and since I have more knowledge about the scene, I should put all that knowledge in, and that could be true, but you also want to kind of understand why. So another example, this is a series I have read, was Twilight. When I was dating my husband, who I eventually married, I was an old woman at 30, and I thought I was never going to get married, and then I met this amazing guy who seemed to get me and checked all my boxes, and I was so excited. And the very first time he took me to his family to meet, his first cousins were all like 10 years older, and his second cousins were all 10 years younger. And there was a number of women, and the first time I went to their event, all of them were like, oh, have you read Twilight? Oh my gosh, it's the best book. Well, who do you think she's going to end up with? And I think it must have been, it was kind of the height, before the movie came out, but the height of the books, something like that. And I was like, Twilight? I haven't heard of Twilight. And I'm a huge reader, so I was kind of almost offended. Like, how could I be a huge reader in the urban fantasy and I read, you know, all that stuff. How can I not know about this book? And I went home. I went back with my boyfriend at the time, who's now my husband, and was like, John, I have to get this book immediately. Next time I go, I'm going to be able to involve myself in all their conversations. And I read it, and to me, it wasn't bad. I don't know that I would have picked it out to be a worldwide bestseller, but one thing to keep in mind for me was I wasn't looking for a romance story. I was living my romance. I had just met the man that I would marry, and I've been together with for 10 years now, and we have a son, and just, you know, however hokey you feel like that is, was I really the target audience for that? No. And I think a lot of it had to do with things like, I can see why teenage girls, she's the most special girl in the world. No matter how much you might roll your eyes at that, that is something that you can say readers are looking for. We see it over and over and over again. The special chosen person. It's actually a trope I adore, because why would I read about some boring person living an average, depressing life? It's also why I don't like a lot of literary fiction. There's enough depression in the real world. I can go to my news app and hear, I checked the news app yesterday and they were all depressing stories. I can get that in real life. I want someone who's special and powerful and magic and has a spaceship and has a dragon and, you know, is the most beautiful person in the world or the most handsome. That's what I want. And so that is valuable information. I think there's also a lot to do with mothers and daughters being able to bond over a book. I wasn't the target audience. I actually read all 4 books. My husband actually read the first book before he was like, you know, this really isn't my thing. And I'm like, you don't care about talking to your cousins? He's like, we have other stuff to talk about. So my point being that, and I say that, I know I say that a lot, is that you need to be in touch with what readers, especially in your genre, are looking for. And so looking at bestsellers, genuine bestsellers, even if you don't get it, have some valuable information. And you see this in books that are bestsellers that have terrible typos. Okay, so clearly it's not the typos, not the grammar that people are being attracted to. If they're overlooking the typos, there must be something even more engaging. And maybe it's the emotional depth. Maybe it's the rise and fall of emotions. In my case, maybe it's the humor. Maybe it's how likable everybody is. Maybe it's a world, a rich world that you want to be a part of. James Bond, people are always like, you know, everything, Michael Bay movies are a great example. So the joke is that all they are is explosions. Guess what? That's what people want from him. So he probably shouldn't go make a Schindler's List type movie, because that's not his strengths. Now, this does become a problem if you don't like any of the books in your genre. Now, you could be the person who upends it and does it totally differently. Like Nicholas Sparks is a great example. He is not romance, so don't yell at me, but who takes the romance genre and says, well, what if someone dies at the end? Okay, he is not a romance writer, although a lot of people confuse that. He even says on his own bibliography, his own website, don't look at Wikipedia because they're wrong, his own website, he says that he writes love stories. So he was obviously someone who goes, well, what if we had all the romance of a romantic story and then someone dies at the end? It works for him, but it's a risk. And so you can always break these. You can say, everybody wants the chosen one, I don't want to write that story. That's fine, but you should always be aware of how far off you are with commercial genres. And I'm not saying you can't do it, just understand it's a risk. And I've done it too. You look at, no one's doing, not no one, very, very few people are doing space cozies, cozy mystery set in space. I knew it was a huge risk. It was a book of my heart. I said, yes, I'm willing to take the risk. It's really well reviewed. It is not selling. So, so there you go. And I will say another reason why risk reward, blah, 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 in touch with your readers. Another thing that can happen is, and this is very common, is that writers can, I mentioned this a little bit earlier about getting so close to the story that you miss why readers read. That is a normal part of a writing process. Not everybody goes through it, but it is exceedingly common that when you get serious about your books, you have a hard time reading. And that's just because you have so much to learn, and people say this all the time about getting their MFA, that they can never watch movies and TV again because all they see are the bones behind what's happening. It's very distracting. That is a totally normal thing. I can do a whole video on about what to do when you're in that case. in that situation. Some simple things are is read outside your genre, try switching to audiobooks where your brain doesn't have time to overthink, and because the story's going to keep going whether you get distracted or not. Go back and read old favorites, things like that. And the last thing I'm going to say, and I'm only going to touch on this very briefly because I feel like this is a whole video, is that sometimes the book is not a bestseller. I mean, it may have the numbers, it may have the ranking, but it may not actually be bestseller. You see this oftentimes when political people write, politicians, whatever, write books. Their political party might buy up a huge amount to artificially inflate. There was a lady last year who did that by hand. She called hundreds of stores and pre-ordered books, and they canceled the pre-orders, but the pre-orders go in, and they were all New York Times reporting bookstores. You can Google the story. I don't remember the lady's name. She was a YA author and it was self-published and all that. But you can, if you Google around, you can see there are people who game the system. There are also quite vocal authors who talk about that a lot of people that are selling classes on how to do stuff, they will dump enormous amounts of advertising money to artificially inflate books, the rankings. Because if you advertise a book enough people will buy it out of curiosity or borrow it in KU to artificially inflate the numbers that, you know, KU reads don't go to New York Times, but they do look at your Amazon rank, which could be an Amazon bestseller, which can get you an All-Stars bonus, etc., etc. But my point being that there is, there can be other factors that has nothing to do with the actual contents between the covers. So 50 Shades of Grey got a big push because of a lot of factors around it. I'm not trying to make a declaration of whether or not it deserved it or not, but I would be blind if I didn't acknowledge and dishonest if I didn't acknowledge that sometimes bestsellers aren't bestsellers. And that's a whole nother video that I can do if people are interested. So there you go. So those are my thoughts on things that we can learn from best-selling books, even if they are not books that we enjoy ourselves. So you guys have a good day and stay safe and sane out there.